Hello, welcome to Season 7 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, our theme is the current state of horror. We'll be watching 20 or so movies from the last couple of years, reviewing them like normal, and then also talking about some of the larger trends we see. If you want to see the list and follow along, check out our website at thehorrific.com. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Okay, so we both grew up in Oklahoma. You still live there. There's a lot of things about sort of the frontier and the prairie and everything that get talked about a lot when you grow up in Oklahoma, because that's part of the state history and everything. Did you, or are you familiar with the term prairie fever?
I'm not. But also, don't rub salt in the wounds. I still live in Oklahoma.
You can get out, man. No, nobody's making you stay.
Getting out is the grave.
The only way out is a body bag. Yeah.
No. Prairie fever.
Prairie fever. So it is a term that I heard a lot growing up in regard to the early people who settled in the plains. So like kind of the middle of the country. And so if you're there alone, especially after coming from like a more populated area, and I think they said a lot of times it was women because the husbands would be out like working the field or whatever. But the wife would be home in the cabin all day, just hearing that wind kind of blow through the wood, and they would go crazy. That's a thing that I had heard a lot growing up. Like that was just a common phrase. And so I started looking for it, and I really couldn't find anything online about it. And then I thought maybe I made it up. Like maybe that's just like I dreamed it or something. But eventually I found a Wikipedia page for prairie madness. And I guess that is like a more common term for it. But that was like a thing. Like people would get really depressed, and that could then lead to, violence or suicide or all kinds of other problems. And that was like a fairly common thing until the West became a little bit more settled. And once people had phones and cars and could take trains and populations were bigger, then it just kind of went away. But it was like a fairly common thing back then.
Kind of shows you how weak those frontiersmen were. You know what I mean? Because Native Americans been doing it.
Yeah.
They slowly go the way of the buffalo, man.
Yeah. They didn't lock themselves in the wooden cabins all day, I guess. So, something to be said for a migratory hunter-gatherer society.
I'm just saying. That's crazy, though. I didn't. So after you said Prairie Madness, it kind of like
it sounded more familiar.
Well, it clicked when you were talking. Yeah. That it makes sense, and that was one thing I was thinking about with this movie. But yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. So that was, I was really curious if that term was going to show up somewhere in this movie or like in reading about this movie, and it didn't. So I don't know if that's a thing that just was talked about, in the areas where it was happening back then, or if it's just a thing that isn't as widely known or whatever. But it really seemed like this movie sort of fit into that idea a lot.
Yeah, I actually wrote down wondering if it was like agoraphobia, which I think what that is like something like anxiety with the environment that you're in, thinking that you're thinking that it's not good or like unsafe. But I guess it's relatively the same thing.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
But see, for me, so I ride a motorcycle. That's it. That's all I wanted to say. No, I'm just kidding. So I ride a motorcycle, and so we take a lot of these roads out here in Oklahoma. And for me, seeing that openness, and it might just be because I come from the city or from like a modern city and stuff, and just people being around, like seeing like the openness, and like we have those wild horse ranches out here. And it's just like seeing those horses run or grazing and stuff, and just seeing how open it is, it calms me.
Yeah.
I'm also Native American.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll introduce it, and then you can do your fun facts, and then we will get down into it.
Good.
In 2018, IFC Midnight brought us The Wind, a supernatural horror film directed by Emma Tammy. This movie is set in the American frontier in the 1800s and tells the story of a woman and her husband who have strange experiences after a new couple moves to an old cabin nearby. It premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival and has made about $28,000 in limited box office release. It can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
That is very true. So the only fact that I actually have about this movie, which I thought you were going to say, so I initially didn't have any facts, was this was the director's debut film. For
nice.
Emma Tammy.
Yeah. I noticed that her name in Wikipedia didn't have a link.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I wondered
Same.
if it was like her only movie so far.
Yeah, that and the same by Teresa Sutherland who wrote it. Mm-hmm. I was hurting for facts, so I was like, all right, I'm going to go into who wrote it, and was kind of curious about what else they had wrote. Nope, couldn't find anything.
Yeah,
I didn't go hard on it, but I was just trying to find something.
Yeah, just in general, I really couldn't find a lot of information about this movie at all, which was kind of surprising. But because it definitely seemed like it had plenty of budget behind it. It wasn't like it was. It didn't feel like an independent film,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the only reason for me why it kind of seemed like an independent film was just the small cast. Because we've seen that with a few those. That's I assume that's kind of how they deal with budget, but that was it though. It still seemed super shot really well and stuff.
But yeah, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Mother, like towards the beginning, where it's just the two of them, and then that outsider comes and she's uncomfortable with it, and things start getting weird. And it wasn't. I know from like the story perspective, it didn't necessarily seem that way because they had the people move in and like befriended them and were helping them and everything. But the way that this movie was put together with all of like flashbacks, it was like a very non-linear story, and it was just kind of jumping all over the place. And I found it really kind of hard to follow a few times.
Absolutely. I wish I'd known that was the case. Because I feel like that could have helped it. I don't know what I couldn't tell you what they could have done to make it, seem like a flashback. Yeah. But it was extremely confusing until I watched this with my mom and wife, and until my mom read and she goes, "Oh, it's flashbacks," and then that's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. It was very abrupt, especially towards the beginning when it would just kind of hop around. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing in a movie. I just feel like the way it was done here was a little bit confusing, and the way that things were kind of being like foreshadowed or set up, you had to pay really close attention and sort of sort out what was happening, and that kind of took away from that feeling of just I'm in the flow of this movie and I'm taking it all in and I'm feeling what they're trying to make me feel. It was almost like it made you be a little bit too mentally involved just to figure out what was happening when, so you kind of missed some of the other things it was trying to do, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that for sure. I think it was obviously like a real quiet film, which I assumed that they were kind of doing on purpose, kind of like a Mother thing as well. But it was almost just like I think maybe sometimes dialogue can help if you're doing a flashback. It like help know what's kind of going on. But it starts off with the birth, or like one of them walking out with the baby all bloody or whatever. Yeah, it was just like I don't know. It was just extremely confusing for me at points where it was just like, I don't know what the heck is going on. I don't know if it's flashbacks or if it was her imagining things when she was putting herself to sleep with chloroform or what. It's
right. So
it was real confusing.
Yeah. So I feel like about midway through the movie, it got a little bit easier to follow because you were sort of in that rhythm of, we're getting things that are happening now and you're getting things that were happening back then. But it was almost like 3 different timelines. So it's like when they first moved out there versus when the new neighbors first came versus like the present.
Yeah.
And it was going back and forth between all 3 of those. And I think that in the beginning, I didn't realize there were 3. I just thought there were 2. So there were some things that didn't fit right.
Mm-hmm.
But then, kind of like you were saying, where it got really confusing was then she starts, because, so general storyline, I guess like in the order that it actually happened, not in the order that it was presented in the movie, was the new neighbors had moved, the wife was pregnant, she she ended up shooting herself, then the original wife who was out there tried to cut the baby out to save it, but wasn't successful. So then they bury the wife, and then the 2 husbands go to town to like get supplies and
for winter.
Yeah. And then the woman is there by herself for a long time and is kind of losing it, and then they come back. But during that long time when she was there by herself and things were getting like creepy and everything, there started being things that you saw that weren't actually happening, and some of it was confirmed and some of it not. So like when the wolves were attacking and she shoots through the door at them, and then the next day she goes outside and the goat's dead, you're like, well, were the wolves even really there, or was that all just in her head? And then, you know, she has the experience where she thinks she kills the reverend who is like possessed, but then once the husband gets back, he says he passed the reverend on his way in, so obviously he wasn't dead. So, you know, it just, so there started being all of these things where you were given conflicting evidence about the same event, and you didn't know what was real and what wasn't, and then combining that with the flashbacks and time being all over the place, it was really just kind of hard to keep your bearings through a lot of that.
I mean, I guess looking at the bigger picture now that you mentioned the prairie fever madness, I can see maybe where they were going with that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was still like you said it in the order, but it was weird because it was like started off with like the wife killing herself and then went to them leaving, and then it was just like jumping back and forth. I was like, God dang.
Yeah.
Give me a break here, people.
Yeah. I had in my notes that the blonde straight up Bill Cosby'd the friend's wife.
Oh,
but that doesn't even make sense. He didn't use chloroform, so
that's true. Very true.
Anyway,
yeah.
It
was brutal.
Yeah,
it was like in the later. She no. I was like, and she sure shit did it.
Yeah. It was weird, and I had a bunch of random stuff in my notes just because I don't know. There was a lot of space in this one. There was a lot of a downtime, and one of the things I had was, I feel like people might naturally ask, is this what it's like to live in Oklahoma? And my answer would be no, there's no mountains in Oklahoma.
That's true, and we've only occasionally had to chloroform people.
Now, one thing, though, that I did think was accurate was that scene where it's after the wolf attack and she goes to bed laying flat on her back and holding the shotgun across her chest.
Mm-hmm.
That is how everyone in Oklahoma sleeps.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah, duh. Wait, other states don't do that?
No. Texas is a mixed bag, it seems.
Whoa. Okay. All right. Yeah, it was, I think for me with this film, one of the redeeming qualities of it was I thought it was shot really well, directed. Like the directing was really good, and there's also specifically like there's one scene where, was it Emma or Lizzie who died?
Emma, I believe.
Okay, so the one who didn't die, her husband's coming back, and she's standing there. Like she had just dealt with the Reverend stuff, mm-hmm. and just talking about the way they shot it. Like she's pointing the shotgun at her husband who's coming in because she doesn't know what to believe because the whole Reverend deal.
Yeah.
And he's standing there with the horse, kind of like with his hand out, and it just like they're kind of like black, and you can see like the woman's on the right side with the gun pointing at the guy on the left side of the screen, far left, far right, and then in the middle is like yellow grass and like the prairie background. I was like, God, that's a really like beautiful shot right there, like a really beautiful still. Really smart move, but looked good. I think that they had the benefit of like having a beautiful scenery that could kind of take your mind off of like what's going on a little bit. But yeah, I thought that was fantastic. Specifically that shot. I actually Googled it to see if I can find a screenshot of it.
Nice. Yeah, there were a couple of scenes that I thought were like really took advantage of the scenery in the, like the landscape and stuff. And I think there were some like kind of decent horror scenes, but they were pretty spread out. I did like the sequence though where Lizzie is home alone when she's pregnant, and then she hears the knock and there's no one at the door, and then it happens again and the candles blow out, and then she's trying to light the candles and the fireplace erupts in flame, and then it cuts to the next day and her husband comes home and she's like in the loft reciting some foreign language prayer, and she has that Demon of the Prairie booklet you see later. But that was like 45 minutes in, and that was really kind of the first like supernatural type thing. And I think we talked last week, maybe it was with The Nun, about how like having that like real like dark horror scene in the very beginning of the movie can kind of set the tone for the rest of it. Whereas this one had, her coming out carrying the dead baby in the beginning, which was like dark, but it wasn't like supernatural, or it didn't give you a reason to be suspect of like other things happening. So that kind of combined with the jumping around in the storytelling, it just didn't really like hit that stride where it was building that feeling of discomfort or dread.
I think with this, you knew that there was like probably like a deeper meaning or something, like there's deeper things to it. It's just with that non-linear, the way it was shot, the scenes, non-linear scenes or whatever, or storytelling, whatever you want to call it. It was just it threw it off, where it was just like you couldn't even think of like it didn't keep you like, it kept you on your toes, but not in a good way. You're just like, wait, what? Like, what's going on here? Like, why is this a thing? Why is she shooting the goat?
Right.
And then the next scene, or a couple scenes later, it's her coming up on the goat and super scared. And it's like, wait, did she imagine that the goat was killed?
Yeah, right.
And then I don't know, man.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me a little bit of The Witch, but without the payoff.
I agree. Yeah, same.
And the ending of this one, I feel like they were kind of trying to go for the same thing, where like it's all just kind of weird and then it builds up and then you have this like super creepy ending. And the kind of closing sequence on this one is where Lizzie and Isaac are fighting, and then Isaac goes outside, and then she's like being thrown around the room by some unseen force, and she lands on her scissors and then passes out. And then the next day she wakes up and he's like tied her to the bed, and he finds the journal and is asking how the other girl found Lizzie's gun. Then you find out, well, really she shot her because she was jealous. And then she grabs a piece of glass and cuts the ropes, and then the husband's eyes go black, kind of like that priest's had, and she stabs him with the glass. And then that's the end, other than a flashback to her meeting the priest on their way in, and he gives her a Bible and that pamphlet about the Demon of the Prairie that seems to keep showing up. So there was never... I was waiting for some kind of like tie it all together move at the end. Like you never really found out about what the Demon of the Prairie was. You never really found out if it was all in her head. It was just kind of like it felt like it wanted to just like shock you and leave you shocked, but I just kind of had questions when it was over. Yeah, I agree. I think for me with this movie, it had a really good concept, like a really good idea. It was just in the way it was told, it kind of let me down. Like, I mean, I love westerns personally, and I've always thought like it'd be a really cool idea to have like a decent, like a well-made
Western horror film. Like that would be like my dream, you know. And I was really pumped about this one, and I realized where I got the idea that, because I think in the last podcast, or maybe when we were just talking, I was talking about it seemed to remind me of Babadook. Well, the reason why is if you watch the preview, it says something about Babadook in it.
Oh, okay.
Because I was showing my mom before we watched it, just to see if she wanted to watch it with us, and like it basically like forces that hand, and it's like you like don't say this is like gonna be like a movie that's really good. It's not.
Don't set up my expectations just to turn them back
and
down.
I did. Yeah. It did, and I was like super pumped. I was like, all right, we got like a frontier horror. Been looking forward to this for a lot of the list. Like I specifically added it, or when we were going through the list, and I was just a little let down. I think though, like how it ties in to what's going on is it's obviously or like ties into like current state of horror. Is something that you actually initially brought up, but it seems like it's been the case for a lot of these, is the mental illness aspect. Yeah, you have the pills that she was taking and using chloroform to go to sleep and stuff, and obviously kind of losing it, and so that's, I mean, it obviously fits into the trend, which, I mean, mental illness is in a lot of horror films, but like especially specifically currently. Yeah. But here's the other thing about this movie. Like I'm just saying, like if I was Lizzie and her husband, whatever his name was, there's only like 6 characters, and I don't remember any of their names.
Yeah, I just called him Cowboy throughout my notes.
Gideon. His name was Gideon. Or Eli. Oh well. So if I was like the original people living out there, and the next thing I know, like in this vast prairie. Yeah. Next thing I know, you got some damn neighbors a mile away from me.
Yeah, right.
I'd be so mad. Yeah. It's like you literally have 100 miles that you can set up shop.
Well, it's like that. What this reminded me of was when you and Katie came down and we all went and saw Strangers Pray at Night. Yes. And I took the day off, and so it was like in the middle of the afternoon. Yeah. And then it was just the 4 of us in that theater, and then that weird dude came and just like sat one seat over.
Yeah. That, what's funny is we said that exact same thing to our mom. I told my mom that story yesterday as to relate to what I was saying for that note. Yeah, it's just like, hey dude, the theater is literally open.
There's like 200 seats.
Yeah, you can sit wherever you want. Yeah, and like it's like these people. It's like, okay, well, yeah, there's already a cabin there, but let me tell you, there's probably another cabin way away from here.
Yeah, or build one.
Yeah. I would be so pissed if I looked out my window and was like, wait a minute. Yeah. Who the hell is this guy? And to top it all off, she's cheating with my husband.
Where? That was my question. It's like, how? There's only 4 people in this whole area. How? There's only 2 houses. So, like, what were their excuses for where they were?
Yeah. Been plowing the farm. Yeah. I think it was also the other thing that confused is just how often Lizzie's husband the husbands were gone. Yeah. Like away. It was just kind of confusing. So it was like, wait, did this happen like a couple days? Like, did all this stuff happen, or was it multiple days, or what? But for me, I was just kind of let down from the movie. It didn't make too much sense. Yeah. They had a ton of potential. Didn't really make sense. Like, if it was a linear story with like that demon or whatever it was, and like the Reverend if that was linear, that would have been like, oh, I mean, I think it would have been a pretty legit film. I really do. Yeah. I think the whole non-linear thing just really threw it for me. And then, the only redeeming quality is how it was shot. The way that the director did, it was just like specifically like actual, like how the scenes were shot, I thought were good.
Yeah. Yeah, my verdict on this one is really similar to what it was with Ma, where I feel like there was a good concept for a movie and there were some interesting things going on, but the movie spent all of its time on the things that weren't interesting.
Yeah.
They could have either explored like the extent of the craziness and really like leaned into that, or they could have gone more to like explain the demon or have more involvement with that, but it didn't do either. And so It just, from a horror perspective, there were really only a couple of scenes that felt like they were being set up like actual horror movie scenes to me.
Yeah, it was there was it definitely. The one thing too, I guess, is at least it was set out to be a horror. Like, I feel like this movie was set out to be a horror, whereas some have like those bad qualities that this film kind of has, but then they have like one scene that's like scary, and it's like, oh, this is a psychological horror, or something like that. It's just like, no, it's insulting to horror movies.
Yeah, there's more stuff going on with this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Except for whatever happened to Jill from Home Improvement.
That's a good question.
That's the mystery I want to know.
Isn't her name Patricia something?
She looks like one.
Well, we can't just not look this up.
I know.
I'm going slower because I'm doing it on my phone, so you don't hear the table
Patricia
move.
Richardson.
Oh yeah.
Patricia. How'd you know that?
I don't know. I'm just stuck with her for some reason.
Kind of miss her.
Yeah.